There is a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from being unloved. It comes from being loved by someone who cannot let themselves stay close to what they feel. If you've ever cared about someone who ran from you exactly when things started to feel real, you already know this isn't ordinary distance. It has a shape to it, a rhythm. Closeness, then withdrawal, then a slow return, then withdrawal again, a cycle that can repeat for months, sometimes years, leaving everyone involved exhausted and confused about what actually happened. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying why people sabotage the very things they want most. Not because they're cruel, not because they don't care, because somewhere inside them, closeness has become tangled up with danger, and the mind will go to extraordinary lengths to protect itself from danger, even when that means pushing away the exact thing it's longing for. Today we're going to walk through why emotionally guarded people do this, not as a character flaw, but as a pattern with real psychological roots. One that unfolds in a fairly predictable cycle once you know what to look for. Understanding this cycle won't necessarily change anyone's behavior, but it might finally help you make sense of something that has probably felt, for a long time, like it made no sense at all. It's worth naming, before we go further, why this particular pattern is so much more painful than ordinary rejection. Ordinary rejection has a clear shape. Someone isn't interested, and the door closes, cleanly enough to grieve and move forward from. This pattern offers no such clarity. The door opens, then closes, then opens again, often with enough warmth in between to make each closing feel like a fresh betrayal rather than a continuation of something familiar. That unpredictability is, in many ways, more exhausting than a clean no would ever be, because it never lets the nervous system fully settle into either hope or closure. Let's start at the beginning of the cycle, because it rarely starts with distance. It starts with connection. The first stage is opening. This is the part everyone remembers fondly, because it's genuinely real. A guarded person, when they feel safe enough, does not hold back in the way you might expect. If anything, they can be startlingly present, attentive, warm, curious about you, in a way that feels different from how they are with almost anyone else. This isn't performance, it's relief. For someone who spends most of their life managing their defenses, finding a person who doesn't trigger those defenses feels like finally being able to exhale. This stage can move quickly, and it often does, because the guarded person isn't used to feeling this at ease and doesn't yet know how much distance to keep. They let more in than they normally would. They share more than they planned to. And for a while, it feels less like the beginning of a complicated pattern and more like the arrival of something rare. Jung would describe this as the persona briefly stepping aside, the practiced protective mask we all wear in ordinary life, quietly lowering, because it no longer feels necessary. It's a genuinely beautiful thing to witness in another person. It is also, unfortunately, the exact moment that sets the rest of the cycle into motion. It's worth understanding why this opening stage tends to move faster with guarded people than it does with almost anyone else. Most people build closeness gradually, testing the water at each step before going further. Guarded people, paradoxically, often skip several of those ordinary steps once they decide someone feels safe. Years of built-up longing for genuine connection don't disappear just because someone has learned to suppress them. When the suppression briefly lifts, what rushes in can feel disproportionately intense, not because the connection is fake, but because it's carrying the weight of everything that's been held back for a very long time. The second stage is alarm. This is where things start to shift, often so subtly that it's hard to notice until you look back on it later. Somewhere inside the guarded person, a kind of internal alert goes off. Not because anything went wrong, because something went right, faster and more deeply than their system was built to tolerate. The same closeness that felt like relief a few weeks ago starts to register differently, not as safety anymore, but as exposure, as too much, too fast, too real. This is the moment Jung's concept of the shadow becomes most relevant. The shadow holds everything a person has learned to hide from themselves, including, very often, the raw, unguarded desire to be fully loved. When someone gets close enough to touch that hidden desire, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like being seen in a place they've spent years keeping dark. And being seen there, even by someone kind, even by someone they genuinely care about, can feel unbearable. So the alarm sounds, and the guarded person starts, almost involuntarily, to create distance, not out of malice, out of a kind of psychological self-preservation that operates faster than conscious thought. The third stage is withdrawal, and this is the stage that causes the most confusion and pain for the person on the receiving end, because it so rarely comes with an explanation. Messages slow down, warmth cools, plans get vague or cancelled, or simply stop being made, and the person left behind is given no real information to work with, only the sudden absence of something that, until recently, felt completely real. This is where most people start blaming themselves, searching for the mistake they must have made, the thing they must have said, the flaw that must have finally been discovered. Here is what's actually happening instead, more often than not. The withdrawal is not a verdict on your worth. It's an attempt, usually unconscious, to regain a sense of control that the closeness took away. Distance feels, to a guarded person, like safety. It's familiar, it's manageable. Even when it costs them the very connection they were craving, it feels less dangerous than staying close enough to be truly affected by someone else. This is also, painfully, the stage where a guarded person can seem almost like a different version of themselves. Colder, more distracted, sometimes irritable, for no clear reason. This isn't the real them reasserting itself after a false start of warmth. It's fear, wearing the costume of indifference, because indifference feels safer to perform than admitting how much they actually feel. There's a specific detail worth understanding about this stage, because it explains a lot of the confusion people feel while living through it. The withdrawal often does not match the actual size of the fear driving it. A guarded person managing an internal alarm bell rarely says, calmly and clearly, "I'm scared of how much I feel for you, so I need some space." Instead, that fear tends to leak out sideways, as sudden busyness, as minor irritability over something unrelated, as a vague explanation that doesn't quite add up. The behavior looks disproportionate to any visible cause, because its actual cause isn't visible at all. It's happening entirely underneath the surface. The fourth stage is the one almost nobody talks about, and it's the reason this entire cycle so often repeats instead of ending cleanly. The fourth stage is longing. Distance, once created, does not actually resolve anything for the guarded person. It simply postpones the feeling, and feelings that get postponed do not disappear. They wait, often more intensely than before, in the quiet moments the guarded person can no longer fully distract themselves from. Jung believed that what we refuse to face consciously continues operating from underneath, shaping mood, shaping restlessness, shaping the strange experience of missing someone you've told yourself you needed distance from. This is why withdrawal is so rarely permanent on its own. The guarded person often finds themselves pulled back, not because the fear disappeared, but because the ache of missing you eventually outweighs the discomfort of closeness, at least for a while. And so the cycle begins again. Opening, alarm, withdrawal, longing, and back to opening, sometimes for a very long time before anything actually changes. If you recognize this pattern in someone you care about, I want to be honest with you about something important, because it's easy to hear all of this and conclude that patience is the answer. that if you just wait long enough, love gently enough, stay steady enough through every withdrawal, eventually the cycle will break, and something lasting will emerge. Sometimes that happens, but it happens because the guarded person does real internal work, not because someone else waited well enough to earn it. Jung's concept of individuation describes exactly this kind of work, the long, uncomfortable process of integrating the parts of yourself you've kept hidden, so that your conscious life and your unconscious fears stop being at war with each other. That process belongs entirely to the person doing it. It cannot be completed on their behalf, no matter how much love, patience, or understanding is offered from the outside. This is the distinction that matters most, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Understanding why someone does this is not the same thing as being responsible for fixing it. You can hold real compassion for someone's fear without making yourself the instrument of their healing. In fact, trying to be that instrument, absorbing every withdrawal, explaining away every inconsistency, making yourself smaller and more patient with each cycle, often does the opposite of what you intend. It teaches the guarded person that the cycle has no real cost, that you'll remain available no matter how many times they retreat, and a pattern with no cost rarely has any reason to change. So what does help, if patience alone doesn't reliably work? Something quieter, and in many ways harder. Staying warm without staying unconditionally available. Remaining open to the connection without organizing your entire emotional life around its unpredictable rhythm. This isn't about punishment, and it isn't about playing games with someone's fear. It's about refusing to disappear from your own life while someone else works out whether they're capable of staying in theirs. There's something worth understanding about why this shift, when you make it, so often changes the dynamic more than any amount of patience could. Guarded people are usually highly attuned to energy, even when they can't always name what they're sensing. They can feel pursuit, and pursuit, paradoxically, often confirms their deepest fear, that closeness comes with pressure, and pressure is dangerous. But they can also feel its absence. They notice when the person who once reached for them consistently stops reaching, not out of anger, but out of a grounded return to their own center. And that shift, more than any reassurance or explanation ever could, sometimes becomes the exact thing that finally interrupts the cycle. Not because you did something clever, because authenticity, especially calm, self-respecting authenticity, is disarming in a way that chasing never is. I want to leave you with something honest, because this topic deserves honesty more than it deserves false comfort. Not every guarded person breaks their own cycle. Some remain inside it indefinitely, protected by walls that never come down, no matter who stands patiently on the other side of them. That is not a reflection of your worth, and it is not evidence that you failed to love well enough. Some people are simply not yet ready, or may never become ready, to do the internal work their own fear requires of them. What you can control is this: whether you stay whole while you find out, whether you keep investing in your own life, your own growth, your own sense of who you are, rather than pausing everything to manage someone else's unresolved history. Real love, the kind that actually lasts, has never once required you to disappear in order to keep it. If a guarded person eventually finds their way through their own cycle, it will be because they chose to, not because you loved them into it. And if they don't, that truth, painful as it is, that doesn't require you to interpret withdrawal as a form of love. There's a final thought worth sitting with, one that reframes this entire cycle in a way that might be useful going forward. Every stage of this pattern, the opening, the alarm, the withdrawal, the longing, is ultimately a conversation the guarded person is having with themselves, using you as the occasion for it. You can witness that conversation. You can even, at times, gently invite more honesty into it, but you cannot conduct it on their behalf. The moment you try, you stop being a person they're falling for and start becoming a project they're avoiding finishing. Neither of those is a role worth accepting indefinitely, no matter how much genuine feeling exists underneath the cycle. If this helped you make sense of a pattern you've been living inside, that's exactly what this was made for.